Another guy I wanted to talk about, he's not necessarily this year's version of anything, but we haven't talked about his situation much on the show. And I felt like you were a good person to have this discussion with because you were always a fan of his. And I think can really bring some good context about what he is as a player to what the Niners should do. And that's Brandon Aiyuk. So as you went back and looked at Aiyuk's season last year and how he's profiled over the last couple years, and we're thinking about those tiers and where he fits into the position hierarchy as a whole, what sort of player is Brandon Aiyuk in your mind at this stage of his career?
Man, as you mentioned, I've always been high on Aiyuk to the point that he was kind of like my favorite bet to break out going into the 2021 season after his 2020 rookie season. Because you look back at that rookie season in reception perception, 75.7% success rate versus man, 77.6% against press. I mean, those are incredible numbers for a rookie season. That, like I said, that says go all in on this type of player becoming an eventual superstar bare minimum. He obviously did not he was not a superstar player. He's barely playing in the first few weeks of the 2021 season, which ironically is the season that I launched the website. I was like, oh boy, we're gonna have to close down shop. I like Brandon Aiyuk might literally destroy my career. This is brutal. We know there was the whole doghouse situation. They put a lot of effort into like grooming him into the player that he now is today, like a guy that blocks his ass off, is like a detailed technician. You know, I wasn't from a route running perspective with him coming out of college. I thought he was a little bit of one of these like kind of wild horse route runners. You know, not just fully a detailed technician yet. It's crazy to think what he's become now, which to me, I think he's one of the best route runners in the league. Like talk about like where I rank these guys in real life, the receiver tiers. Like I thought he was a tier two receiver coming into 2023. And obviously he had an incredible season last year. He's like his profile actually I don't know when we're putting this podcast out, Robert, but like by the time it's out, it might be up on the site. And like, let me tell you what, like it's gonna knock people's socks off because he's like a 90th percentile player almost across the board. You know, I just think to me, I know there's contract, complications. They got to think about paying Purdy at some point. They're paying other players, McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle, the whole deal. They have a great roster, but I struggle to see how this offense can be maximized without an Aiyuk type of player on it. This actually is a great tweet from David Guattieri, who does really good work in the fantasy space, but there have only been a small handful of players who have averaged 3+ yards per route run on 400+ routes since 2010. Victor Cruz, Andre Johnson, Julio Jones did it 3 times in a row. 2015, 2016, 2017. Absolutely absurd. Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill twice, and Brandon Aiyuk and Nico Collins. If you look at just some of those, think about some of those seasons. Julio Jones, 2015, 2016, ex-receiver in Kyle Shanahan's offense. Andre Johnson, ex-receiver in the Kubiak-Shanahan offense. Nico Collins, ex-receiver in the Texans, Shanahan, Bobby Sloak, offshoot offense. Then Brandon Aiyuk in this offense in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan last year. We get caught up in like the gadgety receivers and like some of the designery stuff that Shanahan does, and all that stuff is great. But to me, this offense is fully maximized when you have a high tier 2 or somewhere from Nico Collins to Julio Jones, one of the best receivers to ever, put on the cleats. When you have that guy in that X receiver position, you can get like these truly special seasons. And Aiyuk is that A+ level press man beater. I just think you remove that guy from this offense, this thing is going to look dramatically different and for the worse of it.
His connection with Purdy and the element that those two guys bring on downfield, outside the numbers type throws, when they just take them and when they're available, they didn't used to have that. That wasn't a part of this. And their ability to tap into that last year took this thing to a different level. And I just don't know if you can get that with somebody who's 75% as good as he is. I don't think you can. So now the question... Now the question becomes, what are the practicalities of this, right? So Matt Barrows, who covers the Niners very well for The Athletic, reported, I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago, that the Niners had recently offered him a deal about $26 million a year. That's just not going to get it done. If I'm Aiyuk's people, I'm bringing that yards per route run number into the meeting, sliding it across the table and be like, here we go. This is easy. The tier of guys that I'm in is easy. And the fly in the ointment, I think, with a lot of people, because Devontae Smith got 25 a year. Jalen Waddle, I think, got 28 a year as those kind of 1B type receivers. I'm sure the Niners are going to try to profile him as one of those 1B guys. He's just not. But the one that is the most complicating factor to all of this, to me, is the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract. If Amon-Ra St. Brown is getting $30 million with $77 million guaranteed, then I wouldn't take a penny less than that if I were Brandon Aiyuk. And if you look at the contracts that have been handed out over the last couple of months, St. Brown was at 30 with 77 guaranteed. AJ Brown was at 32 with 84 guaranteed. If I'm Aiyuk's people, I'm not asking for Justin Jefferson money. I'm being reasonable here. Why don't you be reasonable with me? I'll take 31 a year with $80 million guaranteed. Let's call it a day.
Yeah, and here's the problem too, and I would definitely feel this way if I was Aiyuk and if I was, in Aiyuk's camp, which I don't know, maybe give me a little representation here. My God, I mean, I nobody can tell you more about Brandon Aiyuk than me at this point.
Me and you need you deserve a 10% agent's cut, and I just need a little bit of 2% by the time this is all said and done. You and me have been banging the Brandon Aiyuk drum for a very long time. You much louder than I have.
Let me tell you what. I mean, what's St. Brown getting? $30 million per year. If he gets close to that, and I'm getting 10% of it, you're never going to hear from me again. So let's not do that. But no, on a serious note, Brandon Aiyuk is a better player than Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know he's not the same productive, but this is why it matters to look at receivers within buckets within the position, because what Aiyuk is asked to do in this offense, like I said, as that pure boundary perimeter X receiver. It's just a totally different world than a guy like St. Brown or even a guy like Deebo Samuel. And I know at times I've come off as a Deebo Samuel hater because he's always been a great zone coverage beater, but he is consistently throughout the course of his career, even in his great seasons, struggled against press man coverage. And, now everybody says that coming off of the Super Bowl, but that's been the reality of his career, period, in reception perception every single year. And even during Deebo's most dynamic seasons, which I think we can all agree he's probably never going to reach these heights again. But even in that 21 season where Aiyuk is in the doghouse, he's not really a part of the offense in the first half of the year, and Deebo is putting up these absurd numbers, it still felt like in the early part of that season, God, something is missing from this offense. There is an element from a downfield route running perspective, man coverage beating perspective, that is missing even when Deebo is doing the things that he's doing. And part of that's quarterback play, but I think part of that was not having a Brandon Aiyuk fully integrated and at the height of his powers in the offense, which I'm glad you brought up Purdy too. I know Purdy's almost a hot topic that, don't touch that part of the stove or whatever. But for me, when I watch Aiyuk and then obviously watch Purdy, the difference between Purdy and all these other guys that the 49ers have run out of quarterbacks, Purdy will take the hard throws and Aiyuk is running the hard routes. And that's the thing that makes him different to anybody else in this roster. To me, Aiyuk is just that he can run those plays where they don't have. I like Ricky Pearsall a lot. I was actually pleasantly surprised he went in the first round, but even he doesn't profile as that type of player.
And it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, pay him before looking at the practicalities of it. So if we look at this, the Niners are right now slated to be $38 million over the cap in 2025. They're currently slated to bring over a lot of cap space from this year. They have $30 million in current cap space. So that numbers, you can fudge that a little bit. But if they wanted to do this, if they wanted to extend him, and if you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract as an example, he has a $14 million cap hit in the first year of that extension. So if it was something like that for Aiyuk, you could pretty easily, with the money you're going to carry over, and if you moved on from Deebo and potentially one more high-profile guy with a lot of money, let's say Javon Hargrave, if you cut him as a post-June 1st, you could save a lot of money. They could pretty easily fit Aiyuk's deal into next year's financial situation. And then in 2026, it gets a little dicier. You got massive cap hits for Bosa and Warner. You're going to have to pay Purdy by that point. But theoretically, you could do it. Trent Williams is a huge question. If you wanted to restructure his contract at some point, either going into next year or whenever, he's going to be 38 years old in 2026. He'd have a $45 million cap hit if you move some money around. So it's not going to be easy for them to do, but they could still probably fit it in if they were willing to make concessions elsewhere, including maybe moving on from Deebo next year. And if I had to choose between them, it wouldn't even be a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm choosing the younger, harder to find, less injury prone, rarer talent. And I think that's Aiyuk by far when you compare the two of them.
Yeah, it's weird because Debo operates in this extremely singular role that you might not be able to replicate. You might not be able to find another Debo Samuel. Like every Debo is on my like holy trinity of you can't comp a player to this guy during draft season, or I automatically know it's a bad comp. Like people gave freaking Traylon Burks like Debo Samuel comps. I mean, give me a break, bro. But like that's how unique of a player he is that everybody tries to find the next one. There is never a next one. But just in terms of the role on the offense, it's going to be much harder to find an X receiver that can operate at that level versus, a secondary receiver like Debo. And yeah, I mean, Kittle is 31 years old. He has a $20 million cap hit next year as well. Like, I just think that I try to do all I can to keep these guys together this year. That's for sure. But like going forward, I do not want, if I'm having 13 under center, I do not want number 11 anywhere else other than my offense.
I think that's a great point. The Purdy part of this, I do think is worth considering, and their connection and the relationship that they have is worth considering. And you pointing out that Debo is a more unique player, I think that's probably right. But if you're trying to find the best version of your offense as the Niners, if you could get a player who is 75% of Debo or 75% of Aiyuk and slot them in, I think that your value, you'd have more value, and your offense as a whole would be better with the 75% of Debo than it would be to the 75% of Aiyuk, if that makes sense.
Totally agree. Yeah, 100%.
The other part of this is they could franchise him. And I think that should be on the table because that gives you less flexibility, right? Because your $25 million, which is probably what the receiver tag is going to be, is going to hit the cap all at once. And this isn't a situation like the Bengals where you could eat all of T. Higgins' 25 or the $21 million tag because you're not really up against it financially. The Niners are. So that flexibility, I think you could maybe prioritize that. But at the same time, if 2026 is the year that you're really worried about, it might be worth taking that $25 million in 1 year and moving other money around in the short term and prioritizing some flexibility into 26 and 27, all of that after you have to pay the quarterback. So I understand both sides of it. I think no matter what happens and based on the timeline the Niners have, he should be on the San Francisco 49ers in 2024 and 2025, whether it's on the tag or on some sort of extension.
The thing is, like, if they were going to trade him, like if you're trading that player, you better get the AJ Brown trade package. Like I've seen people throw out like, what about a second round pick? I mean, second round pick for a player of Brandon Aiyuk's caliber, that's insane. And if you look back at AJ Brown, his last season in Tennessee was 21, 78.8% success rate versus man in that season, 84.6% against press. I mean, just an absurd, like obnoxiously good receiver, even if the counting stats didn't play that out. Aiyuk is going to profile that way. He did even last year in reception perception in 22, not 23. So yeah, last year, you know what I'm saying? Like in 23, his data is going to be right there with AJ Brown's previous, like last season in Tennessee. I think that's they're very similar players. Just the arc of where Brown is, that if you're watching him, if you're looking at him from like a per route metric, you're looking at him in reception perception, he was an elite receiver in disguise, similar to like the Stephon Diggs situation in Minnesota. And then it became obvious when he goes to a new team where the offense is just more built through him, where he was that featured guy. And the same thing would happen to Aiyuk if he was on another team as well. So, I mean, it should happen to him on this team once they move on from these other guys. So that's what I would be trying to do if I was the 49ers. Like, I wouldn't even entertain a trade discussion if it didn't include like the AJ Brown package, which I don't know that they're going to get at this stage of the calendar.
And also and even next year, if they wanted to tag him and see what might happen with that. But do you think the Titans would do the AJ Brown deal again? I certainly don't think they would. So even if you're getting the return that the Titans did in the AJ Brown deal, the Titans are now having to scramble and pay Calvin Ridley because they ended up trading AJ Brown. So that's another situation where it would easily happen in San Francisco. Debo hits a wall. They move on from Debo after the 25 season. And then you're sitting there in 2026 with Ricky Pearsall and looking at your roster saying, man, it would be really awesome if we had a Brandon Aiyuk type of player that we could drop into this offense with Brock Purdy. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. But again, we hadn't really dug into that.